So Dara, I will open the platform so everybody can join, and 1 minute and you can start, okay?
Perfect. Okay, I think we are good to begin. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this, the first in a three-part series of events in which we take a look at the kind of EU level of energy communities and kind of how we can take that approach and filter that down to local communities and actual on-the-ground experiences. So we're delighted to have with us this morning a number of fantastic speakers. So we'll begin in a moment by hearing from Simona Doka from Haugen, which is the project coordinator of the NRG2peers project. We'll then move on to a speaker from DG Ener, who will be talking about the kind of the relevant legislation and directives and so on. Unfortunately, we've had a last minute change. So Akil Hanoset will not be joining us this morning, but thankfully his colleague, Ana Maria Sanchez Infante, is still with us to give the Commission's position. We'll then move on to Josh Roberts from rescoop.eu. And then we'll hear from Alex Ball from Energy Cities. And then from 11 to 11:30, we'll have a short Q&A session. So if you do have any questions, I would ask you to please put them in the Q&A box. If you are tweeting about today's event, please, I would encourage you to use the Twitter handles for the NRG2peers project, for Housing Europe, and for our co-organizer and colleague, the UIPI. We'd also ask you to use the hashtags, #NRG2peers or #NRGcommunities. And while I have you, I'd like to just tell you quickly about an initiative that we have just begun, which is the Energy Communities Hub, which is a place in which you can find examples of energy communities. And we'll be highlighting those there over the coming months. So you can go to housingevolutionist.eu/energy-communities-hub, and you'll find all the information. So thank you for your attendance and I hope you enjoy the event. Simona, I'd like to hand the floor over to you. Simona Doka is an architect and project leader at Haugen Engineers and Consultants in Netherlands. She is also the coordinator of the NRG2peers project. Simona, very good to have you with us this morning. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Dara. Thank you, everyone. So I'm gonna share my screen, just try it out, so it should work again. All right, so you should be able to see it now. Okay, well, thank you everyone for being here with the NRG2peers project. This is an introduction that we wanted to give, and we're very glad to be part of this initiative and to be able to organize this event. So a little bit about NRG2peers. We're a European project. This is a Horizon2020 funded project that started last year in September. So for September, we're around our first, let's say 9 months, but nevertheless, a lot of things already move forward. The NRG2peers project aims to really support an uptake, a new generation of European peer-to-peer energy communities, and this will be done by a support platform. But this is just one of the elements that NRG2peers is about. NRG2peers is really a lot about empowering users, empowering citizens, using technologies that are available and trying to understand mechanisms to overcome barriers that are existing at the moment in this framework. We have, 16 partners that come from very wide backgrounds and technical expertise. We have, well, experts in energy communities already providing services in energy communities, but we have also municipalities, we have local distributors, and we have, of course, umbrella associations like Housing Europe and UIPI, representing both the public sector and the private sector in the building stock. We also work with a group of experts in social science and anthropology, and that is really the part that for us is the soft part that will enable the user understanding and the citizen engagement. Well, why NRG2peers? I think it's pretty clear, and we can see it almost everywhere. The need for energy communities is really pressing. If we go back to the opening statement of our presidents for the European Commission, we really want to envision our continent and Europe as the first climate neutral continent by 2050. And if we want to reach that target, we know that, of course, we have to set very ambitious goals, but at the same time, we cannot make this alone. So we have to do it in a way that we leave no one behind and we offer perspectives. So one of the main challenge that we are trying to tackle in NRG2peers is indeed the fact that despite a lot of technologies are available at the moment, one of the main obstacles is still the user understanding and acceptance of collective actions in energy communities and the benefits of smart grids. So we are aiming to provide very clear guidance, education and support with respect to the methodologies and the current practices to allow for a very proper and successful setup and uptake of energy communities in Europe. What we are seeing through a very large screen of the current situation is that energy communities and in general social practices in energy still need to become more user-friendly, more attractive, and they need to reflect the smart dimension of existing communities. So really to leverage that smart and user-centered dimension and to top it up with technologies to support the enhancement of that community engagement and social dimension. Energy communities must become more cost-effective, more reliable, and of course they need to become self-sufficient and interactive with existing grids. And in order to do that, we have to resolve issues like access to the grid and grid reluctance for the customers on the network. One of the other important aspects we are tackling within NRG2peers is the fact that there is still a mismatch between European regulations and member states' regulations for what is possible to achieve depending on the different types of energy communities setting that we are studying. There are many different concepts and configurations of energy communities spanning from direct peer-to-peer, peer-to-community, peer-to-energy, but depending on this, depending on the state, different member states, different rules and regulations and barriers are still present. So NRG2peers is really trying to tackle that from the very beginning. How are we going to do this? Well, the first main action that we call the year one is to develop what we call the Readiness levels framework. This is a framework that will allow every municipality, every organization, every existing community to assess how ready that organization is to uptake to a peer-to-peer energy community. And for peer-to-peer here, we mean really the different types of configuration of peer-to-peer. So it could be, again, a peer to community, a peer to community to market. But nevertheless, we are focusing on different indicators that are all together combined, defining the readiness to become an energy community as a whole. So user readiness, of course, all divided into different aspects as well. Market readiness, organizational readiness, technological and infrastructural readiness, and the institutional readiness. So really the idea would be that this tool will serve the different configurations, the different communities to assess and eventually to fix what is needed to move forward for the uptake. Our layer 2 action is indeed the development of the NRG2peers platform per se. This platform will be it's going to be a dynamic platform that would provide smart mechanisms to optimize energy consumption and peak demands at a community level. So of course will be combined to a lot of hardware parts, so a lot of software, a lot of sensoring and connection to existing hardware technologies. But let's say the soft part, which is the combination with gamified elements, will be the X factor for triggering individuals to, for instance, through dynamic personalized settings to interact with the platform and to engage into the peer-to-peer trading. And the third layer, indeed, which is a overarching layer, is more like a soft skill, but it's extremely important as well, is the stimulation and enabling of co-creation of energy communities, strengthened by, for instance, the tool that Dara illustrated before, our Energy Communities Hub, that is really foreseen as a local place where to check upon the latest news, to share news, and also that will be the place where information and workshops and webinars will be shared, organized to really enlarge the knowledge and the network of experts around energy communities in Europe. All this will be tested in our NRG2peers pilot communities. We have 9 demonstration cases spread in Europe, so in Italy, in Slovenia, in Belgium, in the Netherlands. These communities already have different types of readiness. Some of them are already established peer-to-peer communities like the Skonskip floating community in Amsterdam. Some others are just communities of people that really like to know more and engage. So with this, we really have a different spectrum of possibilities. We also have a mixed ownership and social housing projects that will allow us to understand the possible penetration of these mechanisms at different levels. But also within our local network, we were aiming to reach out almost 80,000 residential customers around Europe through dissemination events and engagement through the platform, through the Energy Communities Hub. So I think this is everything. I don't want to take more time than needed, but I think we're going to have a carousel of very interesting presentations today. Don't hesitate to get in touch with me. This is my email. We will also share this information. And for any doubts or if you're curious, just check our website, which is NRG2peers.com. Okay, then I think I'll hand over back to Dara. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Simona, for that very brisk presentation. I hope it was informative in terms of what we're trying to achieve in the NRG2peers project. I'll now hand you over to our speaker from the European Commission. So Ana Maria Sanchez Infante is a policy officer at the Renewables and Energy System Integration Policy Unit of DG ENER at the European Commission. Anna is a financial economist, bringing more than 18 years of professional experience in the European private and public sector before joining the renewables team at DG ENER. Ana Maria, thank you very much for being with us this morning. and I give you the floor.
Thank you very much, Dara, for the nice introduction and presentation, and also for the invitation to this event. As you mentioned already before, we had a slight change in the representation by the Commission, because my colleague Akhil, he had to engage in other more urgent matters, but I'm happy to present also his part and hopefully shed a little bit more of light into the European legislative framework of renewable energy communities and citizen energy communities. I will now try to share my presentation. Just a moment, please. Okay, I think you can see it now on screen. Okay, very brief, because I have, I think, 20 minutes, so I will be explaining, starting with the purpose of energy communities and existing models. I will make this distinction between renewable energy communities and citizen energy communities from the legislative point of view, and also main characteristics and differences. And then I will be making a quick introduction of distinguishing jointly acting self-consumers from renewable energy communities. And then I'm finalizing with a few points on activities of energy communities, which are a little bit more new, which is energy sharing. And I will finish with a couple of mentions on tariffs within the different energy communities frameworks. Starting with the purpose of energy communities and existing models, as the previous panelists already introduced, that we are at the European Commission very much focused since the new Commission started its new office to go for climate neutrality by 2050, and this means that everyone, from citizens to companies to every type of stakeholder you can imagine, has to be involved in this clean energy transition to arrive to this ambition of climate neutrality. Nevertheless, in between, we have very strict targets to comply with now in 2020, but also in 2030. And we can't do this without the help of citizens. So that's why we thought by integrating basically energy communities is not a completely new concept, because many countries in Europe have been already running some similar models to what we have now entrenched in legislation. And what we have seen from these energy communities, they helped, and I come here to the first point, they helped to increase public acceptance of new projects. Because in general, citizens are in favor, of course, of renewable energies. But when it comes that you have a big wind turbine next to your house, you might maybe think otherwise. No? And we thought about making participant citizens into the investment, generation, and also consumption of that energy. This could be helping to increase this public acceptance. Also, another very interesting characteristic, of course, it's a very useful tool to mobilize also private capital for the energy transition, because not only big utility scale projects are interesting from the financial point of view, but also private smaller projects. And then energy communities can also be an interesting tool to increase flexibility in the market. This is a very big, very brief overview of the differences we have entrenched in legislation and renewable energy directive. We have the renewable self-consumer, which is more on the left side. With we are targeting their more individual houses. Then in the middle we have the jointly acting self-consumers, which are citizens living in multi-apartment blocks. They are also included in the legislation. And then on the left-hand side we have renewable energy communities or citizen energy communities, which is a little bit more broader in terms of scope and also participants or members. And then just to make a brief differentiation is that the Renewable Energy Directive, of course, we cover here all types of renewable energy, and the Electricity Directive, they cover all types of electricity, whether renewable or not. In the next slides, we have been trying just to make a little bit of a description of already existing energy communities in Europe. Here, for example, it's a group of citizens. They come together. They set up, in this case, a cooperative with a supplier license. They invest their money in building a project. They sell this energy to the wholesale market, and then they profit from this self-generated electricity by buying it back and consuming it. In the next slide, for example, we have another type of energy communities. Again, here, a group of citizens coming together, investing in a renewable project, selling to the wholesale market, but in this case, they don't have a supply license, but they profit indirectly from the proceeds of their electricity sales or through feed-in tariffs going to the investors in this project. As I said, there are different models. They are partly covered by the European legislation, but in the next slide, what we want to make a little bit clearer here, the European legislation has enlarged a little bit the activities which can be undertaken by these energy communities. Innovative concepts, for example, are energy sharing and the peer-to-peer possibility. And then, of course, this comes with a certain challenge for member states in their implementation into national legislation, as they have to redefine a consumer-supply relationship and regulate new configurations appropriately to what we have in the European legislation. In the next part of my presentation here, I will make a reference between the differences when we talk about energy communities. So we have the concept of citizen energy communities. As I said, this covers electricity, but not only renewable electricity, and this is infringed in Article 16 of the Directive on the Internal Market for Electricity. And then we have the renewable energy communities, part of Article 22 of the Renewable Energy Directive. It's very, one thing I want to focus here in terms of definitions of the Renewable Energy Directive. For example, we have in Article 2 a clear definition, as I said, and here we focus very much on saying that renewable energy communities shouldn't only seek financial profits. They have also to profit from environmental and economic returns. So it's not only you don't set up a renewable energy community only to gain financial profits. You should have also. It's rather, as I say in the slides, it's rather a social concept. Okay, here very brief and graphic overview were areas where both community, citizen energy communities and renewable energy communities overlap. You see they overlap, of course, in the generation of renewable energy electricity. In the next slide, we have briefly explained main characteristics on the left-hand side of the renewable energy communities, and on the right-hand side of the citizen energy communities. You might see some common characteristics, but also differences. Of course, the renewable energy community seeks the promotion of renewables. In fact, this is one also of the ideas of setting up these renewable energy communities, because it would help member states to reach the very ambitious 2030 renewables targets. So it's a favorable. The legislation is favorable condition for the renewable support. It has a strict governance and participation criteria vis-a-vis, for example, membership. And it has also a scope of proximity, a geographical scope of proximity. Vis-a-vis the citizen energy communities, their recognition is more as a market actor. It's important to ensure level playing field and non-discrimination. They have also strict governance, but a more open membership, and they don't have this restriction in terms of geographical proximity. So those are the main differences between the two concepts. Here again, on a table format, we have put the citizen energy community versus the renewable energy communities to see in a very short manner main differences. As I said, repetitively, one covers electricity, the other covers all renewable energy. Membership could be any entity, and the renewable energy communities is restricted to natural persons, local authorities, and SMEs. The control is also a bit different. It's on the citizen energy communities, it's effective control by natural persons, local authorities, and SMEs. On the renewable energy community side, it's similar, but they have to be located in the proximity of the projects. The purpose for both is providing environmental, as I said, environmental, economic, or social community benefits for the members of the local area, and the activities are also very comparable and similar, which are generation, storage, selling, sharing, aggregation, or other energy services and distribution. Here, this is a very interesting characteristic for both, that energy communities can act as a DSO. Can they really do it? So we say here, as per legislation, as regards electricity, member states, they may decide whether to grant citizen energy communities the right to manage distribution networks. So yes, per legislation, it's possible if member states allow it. In the case of renewable energy communities, they can in principle act as DSOs, and this is clearly set as I put on the slide on Article 22, paragraph 4. But again, here the complexity comes a little bit when dealing with electricity. They are a subset of citizen energy communities, so it depends on the national regulatory framework. So the possibility is there, but it's not. It might seem not so straightforward in terms of implementation. Here in the next section, I wanted just to make a short introduction on the main distinction when we talk about jointly acting self-consumers, which is a kind of a subset of renewable self-consumers, and comparing it to the renewable energy communities. Here we have the main differences in geographical scope. Obviously, the jointly acting self-consumers, they are limited to the same building. Member states have the possibility to enlarge a little bit the scope of this building. And in the case of energy communities, the renewable energy installation, they have to be in proximity, the proximity of the REC. In terms of membership, in the jointly acting, it's limited to people living in the same building or apartment block. And here at the renewable energy community side, it's open as long as criteria of the definition of the renewable energy community are met. Legal form, in the case of the renewable energy community, a legal entity is required, and in the jointly acting, legal entity is not required by the directive. It can be a private contract between individuals participating in this concept. The purpose is, as I said already in repeated times, it's to provide environmental, economic, or social benefits rather than only financial profits. In the case of jointly acting self-consumers, it's not specified in the article, but it shouldn't be the main purpose of that self-consumers. So this is in the definition indeed. And then in terms of electricity sharing, it must be possible without prejudice to network charges. Very shortly on the activities of energy communities, as I said, it's not a new concept. Some member states have already energy communities functioning. But in the EU legislation, we think that we have included additional activities to what they are currently doing in some member states. So here you can see the activities we're talking here about: producing, consuming, storing, selling, and sharing. We have explained here a little bit about each activity. Producing, for example, is nothing new. This is like any other generator. Consuming, the next activity, the legal entity can use the electricity produced by the installation and provided by external suppliers. Storing, this is not specific to energy communities. In selling is also not new. The legal entity can sell the electricity to its members on the markets through PPAs like any other generator, or receives feed-in tariffs. And then what is a new concept and makes it a bit more challenging for member states to transpose is the concept of sharing within the community. This is an emerging concept, and here we just put some examples how member states like France or Spain have introduced this concept into legislation. And here again, to now a little bit more on electricity sharing. So what is it in reality? Are we talking about supplying energy? So here, of course, we say that it depends. Defining it, a supply might be disproportionate because it's not as big as like a big supplier of electricity. So it's not. It could be supply, but not in the same like quantity, for example. And sharing needs to be possible. The distinction between sharing and supply. Sharing, as we say here, is multi-directional and more ad hoc, and supply is more from a steady source. Possible criteria could be the size of installation, level of professionalism, etc. The checking regulation for sharing economy. I mean, yeah, we have other business models where they have also a similar concept like sharing, and here we put examples like business models like Airbnb, other platforms, which could be seen as similar. Well, similar is a little bit too exaggerated, but this sharing concept could be seen there as well. And here, who can share it? So it's the legal entity with its members, could be the supply, and then members with renewables installation with other community members if enlarged by member states. How can it be done? As we put here, through the DSO or through private energy service providers and software solutions. So this is a little bit like very briefly trying to explain this new concept of electricity sharing. In the next slides, as we did before, we put all the different entities we have in our European legislation. In the Renewable Energy Directive, we have the renewable self-consumer, the jointly acting renewable self-consumer, and the renewable energy community. And what this concept of energy sharing entails in our legislation. I think it's a very nice overview where you can really, in short time, grasp the main differences and also similarities. And also in the second part of the slide, you have the same explanation for the citizen energy communities, where you have also the concept of active customer, of jointly acting active customers, and the citizen energy communities. And then I think this is my last slide, where we put together an overview of applicable charges, because this is also interesting to take into consideration in the different concepts. I mean, when we're talking about citizen energy communities, this is enshrined in the Internal Electricity Market Directive, and there you have clear rules on network charges and other charges or fees, and also the same for renewable energy communities. And interesting to take into consideration, for example, for renewable energy, for renewable self-consumers in Article 21, when the electricity stays behind the meter, there are no charges. but depending a little bit on 3 cases, they can also be applied some charges. But vis-a-vis when you take the electricity, when you inject it from the grid or take it injected into the grid, you have cost-reflective network charges, and of course all the charges shouldn't be disproportionate or discriminatory. And I think I have arrived to the end of the presentation. Thank you very much for the attention. Sorry to rush through, but we had a lot of slides to present, and at the end I was on my own, so I hope I complied with my 20 minutes presentation. I'm happy to stay for the Q&A session afterwards. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And indeed, I should say to the attendees that we'll be making the presentations available after the event. So all of the information will be there to read kind of more solely and carefully. So, but thank you very much for keeping to the time, Anne-Maria. I'd like to now move on to our next speaker, Josh Roberts. Josh currently serves as a senior policy advisor at ResCoop EU, the European Federation of Citizen Energy Cooperatives, which represents over 1,500 energy communities that work on renewable energy, energy efficiency, and other innovative clean energy technologies. Josh has led ResCoop EU's advocacy efforts on European legislation that acknowledges and supports energy communities as new market actors in the energy transition. Josh, thank you very much for being with us this morning. I give you the floor.
Great. Thanks a lot, Dara. I'm very happy to be with all of you this morning, and I'm going to give you, in the presentation I'm about to give, a quick rundown of how our how we see the clean energy package and sort of where we're at the moment in terms of opportunities and challenges, because there are a lot of interesting things, as you saw presented here from the Commission, and we have to see that it all sort of works together for Europe's citizens. So just to give you a quick introduction to who ResCoop EU is, as Dara mentioned, well, now we have around 1,900, so we're reaching about 2,000 members. We're members of Cooperatives Europe, so as our federation sort of states, we're energy cooperatives, and I'll explain what that is in a second. We're a growing federation. We have members in about 15 different member states at the moment, and we participate in and around Brussels on behalf of our members. So what are our members? So first, this is kind of in line with what the Commission said about energy communities being a social organizational concept in the EU legislation, and that is exactly what we are. You see here, this is the International Cooperative Alliance principles. These are essentially principles that any economic actor can adopt, regardless of their legal form, and be considered a cooperative. And these characteristics really are what distinguish cooperatives from other market actors. They operate in a very different way, based on democratic and open participation that gives people a say regardless of how much they're investing. And the idea is that the cooperative itself has more than just an aim to provide a financial benefit to the members or the owners of the entity. It's more about providing a community purpose, and that is very much what a lot of our members do. They're using energy for socially innovative purposes. And so you can see here, a lot of our members are doing many different things, everything from traditional renewables production. I would say that is probably what a majority of our members engage in, but some of them have also become more professionalized and have been able to supply to their members either on a regional or a local scale. Some have rebelled against the system and have bought back their electricity and gas distribution grid so that they can prioritize renewables in them. And then a lot of our members are looking more at energy efficiency and energy savings, how to provide services to their members, to educate them more on energy matters, and to unlock the potential for other technologies like electric vehicles So, I mean, you kind of heard a little bit about what the Commission was saying in terms of what they wanted to prioritize in including energy communities. And indeed, you heard me say it before, really, it's not so much about energy, it's using energy for something else. Whether it is to fight against climate change and take responsibility for that, whether it is taking back control of local resources so that you can use them for community needs, or whether it is just, you know, sort of trying to convince people of the value of renewable energy and the energy transition and sort of jumping along. And just in terms of concretely how this can what this can actually look like, I just wanted to provide one example. I really like this example. It's basically a project of a solar project that Repowering London. They're a small association in London, and they put basically solar panels on top of social housing. They partner with the local council there to rent the roofs. And they prioritize the revenues that they get from the solar panels to the local inhabitants of the social housing blocks that live there. And this has been a really good model to increase investment in energy efficiency measures in these buildings, to provide training and internships to youth, and to unlock people's understanding about energy. And it's also allowed them to innovate in new technologies. They're currently testing peer-to-peer through the use of blockchain and storage in the estates. And the idea is that they can basically provide cheap, self-generated renewable energy to the residents there. So there are many other examples of this, but this is just one way that we can see that it can result in social good. So, sort of linking all of that to the clean energy package and what the Commission presented, just for you here, this is kind of, again, just sort of like a snapshot of what was the sort of major elements on energy communities that were included in the clean energy package. You heard a lot about the definitions. So that's at the top, just acknowledgement of energy communities and what they can actually do for the energy transition and in the energy sector. Along with that is a basic set of rights to make sure that energy communities can participate in a number of different activities that are possible technologically. So all of this is possible technologically, but a lot of times it's impeded by national rules and regulations. So the idea is to make sure that energy communities have a right to participate in activities like energy sharing, like even peer-to-peer, which I can mention. I mean, there's a provision in an article on collective self-consumption about peer-to-peer, and so energy communities have a right to participate in that activity along with individual self-consumers. Of course, there's also an enabling framework that member states have to put in place, which is more about building capacity and providing communities with resources to sort of unlock the knowledge and education that is required in order to undertake these projects and to reduce the barriers. And then in terms of regulation, it's about creating a level playing field and making sure that regulations are not disproportionate. So we have the clean energy package. It's been, the renewables directive was finalized in 2018, and the last couple of years have been dedicated towards the transposition or the writing into national law of all of the EU rules. And Res2peers has been closely following this process to make sure that these new concepts are properly and adequately reflected in national legislation, because without that, it's really just a concept on paper. It doesn't really mean anything. We need to bring it into practice. So that's what we've been focused on. And as you can see here, we're actually coming very close to the deadline for transposing all of these provisions into national law. The electricity directive provisions on citizen energy communities should have been transposed by the end of last year, and the Renewables Directive needs to be transposed by the end of this month. You can see here from the little key that nobody has fully transposed all of the provisions. So nobody has an A in the class. A lot of member states have partially transposed or have drafts published. So there's a lot of public consultations going on at national level. And those will be reflected later in final drafts. And of course, there's a handful of member states that for one reason or another have not produced a draft. Some don't intend to do this. Germany is one of them, which is a little bit shocking, but nonetheless, there they are. Some of this also has to do with COVID and national elections. There are some cases where national politics or circumstances do sort of trump this type of thing. So we don't want to look at this too broadly speaking. So I'm just going to get into a little bit of the main challenges that we're seeing so far in the transposition. The first, before we get to a technological standpoint, is purely how to organize energy communities at the national level. Some member states already have energy communities that exist. So the challenge there has been to identify legal forms that fit and reflect what actually exists at national level. But even more challenging is where energy communities do not exist, and member states have to come up with a set of different legal forms. A lot of this has been around housing associations or cooperatives or nonprofit entities. So some have taken a more prescriptive approach, while other member states have just sort of used the different criteria in the definition, which in itself is another huge challenge. I'm not going to go through all of these different principles, but basically these 7 principles, some of them you'll see look very similar to the international cooperative principles. That's not by coincidence. This is something that we were fighting for when we were engaging in the clean energy package process. But the truth of the matter is that these definitions are composed of principles, which can be fairly broad and need to be more properly defined. Otherwise, it's very hard to understand what they mean, or even for regulators to oversee them. And that's actually a really important issue, because if you see a lot of the provisions on energy communities are about leveling the playing field, which can mean reducing regulations or providing some different treatment. And in order to ensure that this does not result in competitive distortions, we need to be very clear about how we're defining energy communities. Otherwise, they can be appropriated by larger commercial market actors and abused to the detriment of bringing citizens along. Another one that has been very tricky is the geographic proximity, because a lot of member states don't really understand all the things that energy communities do. They often just look at this principle and say, okay, well, we just set one geographic area and that's that. The fact of the matter is that this will vary between different activities, whether it's peer-to-peer or collective self-consumption in a building, or production, at a municipal level or even a regional level. This can vary. So these are issues that we've faced. Moving maybe more towards a technical aspect, one of the things that the member states have been asked to do as a priority, but actually none of the member states have done, which is somewhat worrying, is they're supposed to assess the potential of development for renewable energy communities at national level, and then to assess the existing barriers for meeting this potential. We're not really sure why the member states missed the homework assignment on this, but it kind of is important because it provides the analytical basis for developing the enabling framework, a lot of which is meant to reduce regulations, to ensure that energy communities have the adequate capacity building support, whether it's around technical expertise or access to finance, having a helping hand from somebody that understands the process. This is all really important. And there's also an aspect here specifically for local authorities, because they often partner with energy communities or want to join one. And Alex will talk more about that. And maybe even probably, I would say, if we're looking at the peer-to-peer energy sharing topic itself, regulation is perhaps the biggest inhibitor to the development of this, because it is such an innovative concept. A lot of what we see now are pilot projects, so it's not something that has been mainstream into the market. And a lot of this is because the regulation simply isn't there to support the development of such activities. We've seen some member states take a more open approach to trying to simplify licensing requirements, such as Flanders. They are in the process of simplifying license requirements for peer-to-peer initiatives where the community is sharing renewable energy solely amongst its members. If you're interested, I recommend you sort of look to that and to see what's been going on there. But then there's a whole heap of other issues. Perhaps the biggest one is around the tariffs and the taxes or other incentives that might be attached to some activity to save on energy that is self-produced and shared among the members. The DSOs have been a huge challenge here as well, because of course they have their bottom line and they want to make sure that they are financing the grid appropriately. But this can also create challenges when trying to set a proper incentive framework for these types of activities.
I might just ask to wrap up shortly. Thank you.
Sure. Yeah, I'm almost finished here. And then lastly is kind of from a distribution perspective, understanding the state of the grid and being able to connect energy communities properly so that they understand what is possible. I mean, these are all kind of issues. There's a sort of other issues to look for in terms of further acknowledging energy communities in other areas, but perhaps I will leave this if you're interested. I will finish with one of the questions I was asked to address is, because we have this Green New Deal and the Fit for 55 legislative package, what can we do with the Renewables Directive? And my answer was kind of nothing. We don't really want anything with this new legislative revision. As you can see from the previous presentation and mine, these are very new concepts, which are often difficult to understand from an organizational and social perspective, but also from a technical and regulatory perspective. So from our standpoint, we want to make sure that these provisions are properly transposed. We can see where they stand, and then we sort of move to tinker. But right now, we're just looking for what was agreed to be implemented. This isn't too much of an ask, it's a legal obligation, but it's also important that we don't just get lost in this, and that we also ensure that energy communities are more broadly reflected in other energy policies. And with that, thank you very much. Apologies for running over my time a bit. Interested in the question session.
No, thank you very, very much. It was really dynamic and interesting. You covered an awful lot of what we hope to discuss in the Q&A section, hopefully, and indeed the NRG2peers project. So thank you very, very much. I'd like to now give the floor to Alex Bull. Alex coordinates the EU Climate and Energy Advocacy Strategy at Energy Cities Brussels office. As part of this role, Alex was among the key Brussels advocates that successfully campaigned for the inclusion on community energy provisions in the renewable and electricity directives. Alex, thank you very much for being with us this morning, and I'll give you the floor.
Thank you, Dara. Thank you very much. I have to say I'm honored to have the opportunity to give this presentation to represent cities today in this debate, because I think there is a growing body of evidence showing the huge contribution that cities can really make to scaling up the community energy movement. So I think it's indeed a very important topic. Maybe just a few words about Energy Cities, that we are indeed the Association of Cities in Energy Transition. Actually, now a bit more, we're representing cities that are trying to work on future-proof economic and societal models from the departure point of the energy transition. So this is a bit our new vision. We have an office in France, and I'm actually based in Brussels, indeed, working on the advocacy activities. Maybe just transitioning from Josh's presentation, I think it's relevant to say that we are actually a strong partner of Rescoop EU, and this is really showing that our members, like the cooperatives and the cities, have a strong wish to work more closely together. And as a little spoiler, I'll just like to add that we will be organizing our conference together at the end of April in the Netherlands, in Heerlen, physically, hopefully. And so, yes, we really have a strong cooperation, and it's really showing the wish of cities to work more closely with energy communities. So, yes, so moving on to the next slide, how cities connect to community energy. So I think there is a number of ways, which is showing really the leverage effect that cities can have in this overall framework of scaling up community energy movement, and really provide a fertile ground to the movement and for more and more projects to emerge. So it's really important to have the cities join and have the cities on board from the very beginning. One thing that's important also to say, I think we have heard and overheard that community energy is good to foster public acceptance, but I think it's maybe, to us, it's maybe a flawed argument in a way that it's not really about it's not about making sure that people don't stand in the way of the transition, but it should be about making sure that people actually shape this transition and co-design this transition. And this is what cities have really understood, and that's how they're working, and that's why also they're working on community energy projects. So I think community energy projects can provide partial answers to creating a new economic development models, and a lot of cities are working on that, are experimenting with that, like Brussels or Amsterdam with the donut economics models. And the COVID crisis has really exposed the fragility of the system, as shown as well that we need to move to shorter supply chains, not only for food and materials, but also for energy production and supply. So this is part of why they're working on this. This is also about promoting more democratic practices, as Josh has mentioned. So being more accountable to their citizens, by creating more inclusive and participatory processes in general. I want to give the example of the public authorities of Barcelona. They have created an energy utility, a local energy utility that's called Barcelona Energia. And they have, I mean, it could not be qualified as an energy community per se, because it's 100% public, but maybe we can discuss also about this in the debate part. But they actually have a very democratic governance to their energy utility, where they have a council of users that actually makes concrete proposals to the utility, and it's made up of the consumers and of the neighborhood associations. So we really see a wish on the part of the city to work on this. And if I take the words of the Barcelona Energy Agency, they say that they are doing this to break away from the profit-oriented oligopolistic model that dominates the Spanish energy market. So these are not the words of an energy activist or of an NGO, and it really shows that public authorities themselves also see this not as a technical question, but also as an ideological question to move towards more just and more inclusive societal models. Then this brings me also to my next point, that taking again the example of the Barcelona Energy Utility, they created that utility also to tackle energy poverty. So indeed, this is something where cities come on board to make sure that community energy is not a prerogative of the happy few, but it's actually linked to, it's actually the pilot projects are rolled out in vulnerable neighborhood. They are involving more vulnerable consumers and the energy poor. So that's also where cities very much come into play. And last but not least, also linking community energy movements to indeed energy efficiency. Is also something that cities often do jointly with cooperatives, and I will come back to this. So indeed, moving to the next slide, what support models for collaboration with municipalities? So I think cities can really act at different levels to provide the right framework for community energy projects to develop. So they can act as policy and regulation enabler. So that's about, for example, setting qualitative and quantitative targets for energy communities to develop. I can give the example of the Occitanie region in France, in the south of France, where they have committed to have 500 citizen energy projects by 2030, and they want to have 100,000 energy citizens involved in those projects. In Scotland, at the higher government level, we know that they have adopted a megawatt target by 2030. So it can really take different shapes, but it's important to have this higher level policy commitment. Then, of course, that's perhaps the most obvious role. Cities, local authorities can act as project facilitators. So this is about creating dedicated funding instruments to make sure the projects are not only bankable, but also even before that, when it's just an idea, it's to provide the technical assistance to develop the feasibility studies, to have an investment concept for the project. So that's actually crucial. There's also the whole non-financial support, which is huge, where the cities, we know that, for example, cooperatives rely a lot on volunteering, so the cities can provide staff expertise. In the UK, for example, the city of Plymouth, which was at the initiative of creating the Plymouth Energy Community, which is a very successful one, they have a shared service agreement to provide staff expertise to the energy community. But I mean, there are obviously a number of ways. Leasing roofs is an obvious way, as Josh has mentioned. But yeah, so access to land, infrastructure, and communication support. Something that can be also quite instrumental is for the city to act as an intermediary with other local economic operators, and I will come back to that later in the presentation, and develop the whole set of tools and guidance materials from heat maps to solar cadasters, one-stop shops, etc. And it's important to mention that indeed it's also part of the Renewable Energy Directive that the member states should build the capacities of the cities to actually help their energy communities. So, and actually be more able to play this role of project facilitator. Then crucially, the cities can also be customers and buyers of energy services, and not only so it's not only about energy communities supplying green electricity for their roofs. It's also, as we discussed, they can now perform so many different energy services that it can be about changing all the lighting of the city to efficient LED system, to moving the city's mobility fleet to an electricity one, or to shared and more sustainable mobility alternatives. And then playing this role of buyer and clients, they can also have criteria that are not only in their public procurement, that are not only green criteria, but are also criteria about more participatory projects and cooperative projects. And we know that cities, notably in France and Belgium, have actually done that. And indeed, last but not least, of course, they can become a shareholder and a member of the community energy project now, also thanks to EU legislation, where they are recognized as a potential shareholder. So I'd like to maybe give you two quite emblematic success stories to show you that when cities start at the higher policy level of involving citizens in the climate transition, it's usually these cities that then develop the whole series of tools and materials and instruments to really empower energy communities. So starting with the example of Grenoble, which is a city that won the 2022 Green Capital Award, and they won because they actually, one of the reasons is that they wanted to have this collective intelligence at the service of the climate transition. They have a citizen convention for climate, so they made up of 150 citizens that actually make concrete proposals, which are then, for some of them, submitted to referendum. So it's a very ambitious strategy. And they have identified community energy as a way to reach their concrete renewables target. And they have developed feasibility studies. They have provided bank guarantee also to make sure that the energy community can actually access the loans. They have provided also the staff and legal support that I mentioned, priority access to public roofs. They have developed a solar cadastre. So they really have ticked all the boxes that I mentioned of a project facilitator for community energy projects. Importantly as well, they have played this role of intermediation. We were talking about the difficulty sometimes of interacting with the DSO. So they helped the local energy community through a service, to enter in a sort of memorandum of understanding with the DSO. And finally, they also became a member of one of the local energy community. A very ambitious city, of course, that a lot of you probably know about their success stories is the city of Ghent in Belgium, which was the first actually Belgian city to join the Covenant of Mayors back in 2008. They also have a lot of climate energy and sort of working on an inclusive energy transition. They have a climate arena to involve young people in making concrete also proposals on their climate plans. And they have singled out the support of energy communities as a concrete action of their climate plan towards 2025, and a concrete way to achieve also their targets of doubling the PV capacity by 2025, adding a huge wind capacity, and also moving to a non-gas heating by 2050. They also are making the links between towards vulnerable consumers, as I mentioned, having their pilot project also in vulnerable neighborhoods. And they have a very progressive and ambitious one-stop shop, which is not only looking at individual building renovation, but is looking at collective renovation at neighborhood level. So also giving more opportunities for community energy projects to develop. They have created also a solar cadastre, but they also have a heat map to show to the citizens what is the best renewable heating system that they can develop. And I think interestingly also in their climate plan, they mentioned that they want to act as an energy broker, and that's the interesting choice of word that they use to, for example, promote the exchange of heat and waste flows between businesses and also, of course, between energy communities. And I mentioned the importance of having criteria that reward the participatory nature of a project, not only the green nature of a project. And so they also included in some of their public procurement criteria the ICA principles, International Cooperative Alliance principles that Josh actually mentioned before. So it's a very progressive city. So maybe just to conclude, I just wanted to throw some food for thought on the concept of the circular economy. Because I think it's the EU has a strategy on that, and I think it could be interesting to actually broaden the definition that we have of the circular economy, because that's what cities are actually doing. More and more of them are applying this principle not only to materials and flows, as in the traditional definition, but also to creating circular capital flows, like closed looped, also for capital flow to continuously contribute to transition, to local resilience and transition projects. So finishing on that, I just wanted to say that actually Ghent, that I mentioned, has done that with their plan to install 30 new wind turbines in the city. They have created a revolving funds, and actually for the revenues of the wind turbines to actually finance grants and subsidies that will help a greater number of inhabitants to invest in heating, sustainable heating systems. So it's kind of electricity projects, cross-funding heat projects. So that's quite interesting. But also in smaller municipalities that has been done, like in Porto Torres in Sardinia in Italy, the city has created a PV revolving fund whereby so the way it works is basically they are supporting the installation of PV systems in vulnerable consumer groups, and the proceeds of those installations, so they are sold, the non-consumed energy is sold back to the grid, and the proceeds of the sales are then used to finance a revolving fund to finance further installations. So there's really like a virtuous logic to this fund. In the city of Eeklo in Belgium, which is really a champion on community energy, they have adopted what they call a democratic support model, where they are asking developers, the council has adopted a municipal decision where they're asking developers to open 25% of the shares to the local citizens of wind turbines and another 25% to the city. And they are also asking, but it's on a voluntary basis, the developers to contribute to a local fund, 5,000 euros per turbine per year, to a neighborhood fund, and another 5,000 to a climate fund. So it's sort of mitigation measures that is contributing to adaptation measures. So it's really, I think it's a very interesting examples, these revolving funds that we see emerging in more and more cities. So finishing, I just wanted to share the link to 2 publications that we have authored and co-authored on this topic. And with that, I'm happy to move to the discussion and question session. And thank you all for your attention.
Thank you very much, Alex, and indeed to all our speakers. So indeed, we'll now move to the Q&A portion of today's event. So I'd like to quickly bring in from the floor, if I may, one of our attendees, Özgür Oner, who is the Director of the EU representation at Geographic, the German public and private real estate and housing union, who's also a member of Housing Europe. Özgür, I wonder, could I trouble you to give us maybe a minute or two, kind of your reaction to the presentations you've seen today, and maybe to also ask the opening question to our panelists.
Thank you very much, Dara. First of all, I would like to thank all speakers for great presentations, and I was really listening, very fascinated to Anna Maria concerning the legal framework, and I think we would have the need to talk more about legal frameworks, especially also in the implementation phases within the member states, but also for the great role of cooperatives, what cooperatives could play, and then from Alex, the great examples in the municipalities. From a German point of view, energy communities, we don't have energy communities in the German housing sector itself. So if you take the EU definition as a basis, but nevertheless, housing companies in Germany are supplying the tenants with tenant electricity, and that is mainly done with the help of service providers of energy cooperatives, as it's too complicated for the housing company to become an energy provider on its own. But it's not an energy community, but this is not really an energy community, what we have discussed so far. And there is also a problem behind that. In an energy community, we take our tenants have the right within the liberalization of the energy market to terminate the contract annually. And that ruins any kind of economical, feasible calculation of the providers, either the housing company or also an energy provider or an energy cooperative. So what we would need would be definitely a neighborhood approach as decentralized energy for the decentralized energy production, and decentralized energy supply would be based on a neighborhood approach would mean the use of renewables such as photovoltaics, geothermal energy, and new forms of energy storage such as hydrogen, the use of waste heat in the production of hydrogen to supply heat to buildings, but feeding the energy then into the grid, into the supply grid. And this kind of neighborhood approach would make also necessary legal changes. Legal changes would means in that way, for instance, considering the whole neighborhood, or the whole neighborhood as the level of consumer, as the level of consumer for the energy, and not the building, the single building. And that is also one of the concepts that we are following at the German level within the housing sector, to use energy cooperatives, but more as service providers, not in the way also as Josh and also Alex have presented that, not in the way of installing the photovoltaics, because this is always a strategical decision of the landlord, building owner, whether to rent out the roof or to keep the roof. there are also practical problems. What are you going to do if you do energy renovation, or if you do a renovation within the building? You have to ask to talk with someone who has invested a lot of money in photovoltaics, or if in the area there is a need to increase the density, so you have to build 2 or 3 floors more on the roof. So that is something that that is a strategical decision of the landlord. So I would recommend not to interfere into that, but to find a way how energy cooperatives could work as service providers, and could manage the energy provision and also the energy consumption within the neighborhood. And then the advantage would be also that the exchange of data would take place at neighborhood level, not at the building or at the apartment level. So the energy service provider could work on the balance of the energy need. And the coordination, of course, between cities, energy cooperatives, building owners, and citizens, that would be crucial. But I have some questions for all of the speakers, and that would be great if we would have also the time to discuss that. One is, of course, also linked more to the Commission. Is it appropriate to treat photovoltaic roofs as power plants with all on similar regulations and with all related regulations? And the second question to all of you would be, isn't time to designate photovoltaic systems and renewable energy production on the buildings to the neighborhood in general? So I would like to finish with that. And again, thank you very much.
Thank you very, very much, Özgür. So maybe Anna-Marie, I might ask you to come in on that.
Yes, on the first question on solar plants, I don't exactly know if I understand. Sorry, if I understood the question correctly. I mean, solar, well, PV plants. I'm not sure if you're referring more to solar roof panels. If they have to go through the same administrative process as a utility scale solar PV farm. I'm not sure if you meant this. Why we, I mean, all the different renewable plans, they need to go through a strict administrative and permitting process, whether they are like big utility scale size plans or smaller. Of course, when you consider smaller administrative and permitting procedures, they have to be well, simpler. And for that, we have also like in the legislation limitation on size and considering, I think it's the case of renewable self-consumption, there's a limitation on size. And so, I mean, it should be easier for smaller size installations to get quicker through the administrative and permitting process. So I'm not sure if I'm answering your question on this.
Not really. Partially.
Not really. Well, then you might repeat the question, but this is how I understood it.
It's also linked to the obligation for energy providers, also for photovoltaic systems, to provide the utilities and the grid with information on energy provided into the grid in 15 minutes or in quarters of an hour, how much the voltage will be, and so on. And that is, if we could take the photovoltaic and renewable energy production completely out of that system, and if we really look at the neighborhood level, and if we would have an energy cooperative, for instance, as a provider, as a service provider, so then we could see with the public utility, with the municipality, with the cooperative, and with the buildings, how to balance out the need of energy within the district, and don't put the whole neighborhood into this accounting system of the grid. And so the situation now is even for smaller providers, they have to fulfill the regulations like providing or like operating a power plant. And that makes it quite difficult. Another point is, of course, that is also a legal issue. Would it make it sense within the start of renewable energies to at least to interrupt for a certain period the liberalization of the energy market principle, for instance, in the renewable energy production, because the investment is quite high. And if tenants, and these aren't always very well educated academic people involved in climate issues, if the tenant as a consumer decides every year to change the contract, you can't build up a sustainable renewable energy production within the district. So there is a contradiction within the liberalization concept on the one hand, and the establishment of a sustainable renewable energy system on the other hand. So that is also, but especially if we always look at the neighborhood level, a question what we have to ask ourselves.
I don't know if the other panelists want to intervene, comment on this.
Yeah, maybe quite briefly, I see we have quite a few questions in the chat to get through. So if any panelists want to come in, maybe 30 seconds, 40 seconds maximum. Thanks. I know it's a difficult topic.
I don't know. I can just say, I mean, I know that energy community is I think it's a very strong response to traditional liberalism and the energy market. But we see it's kind of complicated. We see it as a double-edged sword, because with liberalization, that's how a lot of our members were able to start supplying energy. It's also how communities were able to start sort of take back their grid. But if you're talking about how we challenge traditional market paradigms, I would say, yes, we're trying to do that within the market. We're not trying to question the market, but we want the market to align more with our social values, and allowing people to do things who aren't necessarily trading professionals in the sector is very important in that. Yeah.
No, thank you very much, Josh. I might bring in, sorry, Uzgur, thank you very much for your contribution. I think it was very valuable. I'd like to bring another person in from the floor who's been waiting patiently. It's Benjamin Wilkin, who is the General Secretary of the l'Association pour la promotion des énergies renouvelables, APER, which is a Belgian-based association whose mission is to support citizens and communities in their appropriation of renewable energy. So Benjamin, maybe I could turn to you also for a few quick reactions to what you've heard today, and maybe if you have a question for our panelists, that'd be great.
Yes, actually, I think that Uzgur took my point, my main point. But anyway, no, I think, yeah, I have to say that we are involved into as well the transposition of the directives, as well into the setup and management of pilot project of energy communities in Belgium. So our older energy communities is running from 1 year now. So we are sharing and selling electricity, I would say, from 1 year now. And we do have 2 or 3 other projects that are, yes, on starting block to share renewable energy. And so still we do have some very practical feedbacks from these experiments. And I have to say that, yeah, it seems that things are quite complicated when it's about a community, as you need to set up a legal entity, you need to have a status, you need to publicate your status. It implies cost, of course. You need to have a bank account. It implies cost as well. You need to, yeah, you have many administrative things to do. And all these are extra costs. And basically, of course, we do care and we share the principle of I would say social economy that is behind the definitions of the 2 communities, whatever it is, renewable or citizen energy communities. But we can see that, yes, if you do have overcost or too many administrative things to do. These are huge barriers. So, okay, people could be motivated from some month and so on, and you do have some, yes, pretty well educated and voluntary people into pilot project. But our goal is not to make pilot project. Our goal is to make these concepts really popular. And so, yes, we need to overcome these barriers. And the first one is that when you are sharing electricity, for instance, you will have two bills. Today you only have one. Tomorrow you will have two. One from your energy community, for instance, and one from your provider. This is just, yeah, you cannot go over this. So this is just a first barrier, practical barrier. And so I think there are many, yes, many values and beauty things into these concepts, but we need to tackle a financial, I think, a financial benefit anyway. I'm not speaking about an economical benefit, not a financial profit, but an economical benefit. And as Osgur said, it's quite difficult because we can see that there is a lack of competitiveness in the future possible. Two example, the first one, okay, let's build today an energy community based on solar PV, for instance. We do know the price of the electricity for the 20 to 25 years ahead. It's a fixed cost because we only, mainly we only have the cost of the installation. So we know the price of this electricity for the coming 25 years. But if the price of the gross market that you can get to a common provider goes below this cost, as Osgur said, in a few weeks, my members can go out of the community to have cheaper electricity. So my business model is just down. And even further, it could be because, yes, many people said and believe or could believe that the price of the gross market will go up in the future. Okay, but nobody knows actually. So it can go down. It's a possibility. But maybe a more important possibility is the competitiveness between communities themselves. Because if we install PV today on a building, for instance, and another community in the neighborhood install PV in 5 or 10 years, maybe they will pay less than I did today. So their cost of energy will be lower. So we can have competitiveness between communities in the same neighborhood, which is not the purpose, I guess. So the liberty of going and leaving of the end user, which is, if I remember good, it's less than a month if you do have a smart meters. The recommendation of the Europe or obligation of Europe is really a huge thread for this development of and this mobilization of the local capital. So yeah, so the question is, what can we do with this? What can member states put in place to overcome this bigger thread? Yeah, that's it. I'm sorry, it's a bit the same question as Osgur, but I think it's the more critical point.
I might ask, because we haven't heard from her yet, but I might ask Alex to maybe give us a few thoughts on that, and then I'll bring in Anna Maria, because I know that maybe you're the person to give us the answers on this one.
Thank you, Dara. I think, well, it's not really related to perhaps selling at household level or providing electricity at household level, but something that I've been wondering about for a while is to what extent member states should or could support energy communities to enter into power purchase agreements with big electricity consumers like public authorities, for example, I think in Belgium, it's something that has happened, like the SNCB has had a power purchase agreement or something like that. And if energy communities could be the one getting into this power purchase agreement, again, for big electricity consumers, that means that it's like the contract is secured on a long-term basis, and the electricity price is fixed also on a long-term basis. So this insecurity is lifted. But yeah, I wanted to also add a comment on indeed, like I think this is also should be, I mean, the Renewables Directive should in theory, member states should make sure that there is what you mentioned about the licensing and just like opening an account and getting the statutes and everything. That should be part of the request upon member states to ease the kind of regulatory barriers. So that should be, in a sense, answered through the transposition. But another concern that we've received from one of our members, the city of Strasbourg in France, where they are indeed engaging a lot with energy communities, and that's a worry of us, is that they're telling us that according to EU legislation now, or at least according to how France will follow EU legislation, they can no longer combine a specific enabling support. So basically, if they do receive a feed-in tariff, then they can no longer access help from the regional level, and they can no longer get the free allocation of roof space. So the combination of various types of support frameworks cannot be allocated apparently in France. So it's okay for bigger commercial operators, but it would be a problem for smaller energy communities. So kind of a reflection also, and perhaps I would be happy to know if that's also the Commission understanding.
Thank you very much, Alex. Well, basically, I just wanted to comment that point taken on all the perceived difficulties. And in fact, from the Commission side, until we don't see the legal framework transposed, and this we are going to start doing this check process once the deadline has passed, so in a couple of weeks. We won't see how the member states have in fact transposed it to national legislation. This is one exercise we will be doing. Another exercise will be seeing, of course, the impact of this legislation, because as we mentioned it's a new concept. It was brought on European legislation level. Now it has to be transposed to national level, and we have to see if this is really effective in what we want to see. Precisely, we don't want to see what you were now describing, only difficulties and barriers and lengthy times, and so to be honest, this will be like a next step. We have to see what effectively this new law is doing per member state, and then of course to react. What we are doing now, or what we have been doing until now, is to have a lot of course, bilateral calls, meetings, when we could still meet physically with different authorities, member states, on questions they had in the transposition. So that there we were doing a lot of guidance and interpretation work, and now we will see the effects. But there is really like a very clear line in our legislation that member states, they have to provide what we call an enabling framework, precisely to avoid clear administrative barriers. So if this is perceived that it hasn't been done, then we have to, of course, from the Commission side, we will be reacting to it, indeed. But now we are a little bit, our hands are still bound, because we still need to wait for the finalization of transposition. I know that this is not a very satisfying answer, but this is all what we can do for the time being.
Anna Maria, I see that we're now over the time, so I hope I won't keep you any longer. But Anna Maria, thank you very much, particularly to you for being here. I know it's not easy when you're the only policymaker, shall we say, in the room of people who rely on that policy to do what they do. So thank you very, very much for for taking the questions from the panelists and from everybody here today. Thank you also to Özgür, to Simona, to Benjamin, to all of you who asked questions in the Q&A. I know we didn't get to as many questions as we would have liked, but I have taken note of them. So hopefully we can try and get answers for you in the coming days. As I said at the beginning of this event, this is the first of a three-part series where we'll be looking at how EU level directives and policy can actually filter down to the local level, and how we can make that connection a bit stronger, and how we can make sure that energy communities have the right frameworks in place to do what they do best. So keep your eyes on the UIPI website, on the Housing Europe website, on the NRG2peers website, and hopefully this is the start of an ongoing dialogue between all of us to make sure that energy communities grow and find their place more sustainably within the European Union. So on that note, I'd like to thank you all very, very much for your attendance and your attention, and hopefully we'll see you again soon. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.